Well, hey everyone, here we are at the Christian Product Expo in one of the halls behind where everything is going on. And we are doing this a little out of the box as opposed to from my studio at the office. I am here with Sam Blumenthal at the Christian Product Expo, and we're going to just have a conversation about his book, Once Upon a Time. I want you to get to know, just get a bird's eye view of how God has worked in Sam's life and how he ended up writing this book and some insight. So welcome to the podcast today. It's great to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Tell us, how did God really get a hold of you?
Well, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you know Jewish last names, Blumenthal is a very Jewish last name. There's no Blumenthal in the world who's not Jewish.
Yep.
Family was involved, very much involved in temple life. Most Jews these days have become more secular than religious. That's kind of how we were. My parents were, again, very involved in the Jewish community, but God was not real. It's not a personal God. Just there's a lot of tradition. But it was definitely part of my life. I was married young. My first wife and I had 3 sons, and then we were divorced after 19 years, and then was married a second time, and that was kind of how I was exposed to the gospel. My second wife was a Christian, but our relationship became very difficult, so difficult it kind of actually brought me to my knees. That was really kind of the way in which I come to believe in God and the Bible and the gospel and Jesus. I was not looking for it, really. It just kind of happened that way.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I was 45 when that happened. That was in 2000, actually accepted the Lord.
So she was a believer.
She was.
And she kind of shared her faith with you?
Well,
or how did that happen?
No, a whole lot. She actually even had been to seminary. She was a great teacher. Our relationship was very difficult. Our marriage didn't survive, I'm sorry to say. But some years later, what God eventually revealed to me was that the biggest idol in my life had always been the woman in my life, which is not something I knew or understood, and most people don't knew something like that. And then looking back, that really explained why all of it had been so difficult. It was difficult anyway. Anybody in a very conflict-laden marriage, it's hard. But it was, for my side of it, it was particularly hard for me because people, the church, and we don't talk about idolatry as much as we should. It's really like an addiction. It really functions that way. It's kind of your identity. You don't realize it, but it's kind of your identity. It's your self-esteem. To make it more understandable. Back then, for me to really feel kind of settled and secure and okay about myself as a person, especially as a man, I needed this person to affirm me.
Right.
And here I was in a situation where the conflict was such that just really was not happening. So, and that was kind of, God. So he not only revealed it to me some years later, he delivered it to me from it, which is like a whole nother story. But when that happened, actually, is when I started writing. And for many years wrote a nonfiction book. It was still not published. It's a couple of books, probably. But it was just so incredible what he revealed to me, how much it controlled me, but how much I didn't see it. And all of that I started writing. And then actually to kind of take a little bit of a break from that because I needed it, I started writing short stories, which are all very, very similar. The themes are very similar, same gospel themes, easier to write because a short story is like a parable. It's just really just one idea. It becomes more than that, but it starts with just one idea. Okay. Yeah, and I love writing fiction. Need to get back to the other project, but that's really how it began. The insight God gave me and then the deliverance was just so unbelievable. I just had to start writing it down. That's how it started.
That is one of the best ways to process. I mean, journaling, writing.
Yeah.
And then it seems like when you write, all of a sudden you get insight that you couldn't really put into words before you started that writing process.
Yeah, for me, the deliverance came first. and it was so, and then there was further insight as time went on,
Mm-hmm.
but it really happened. It was almost as incredible as coming to faith. I came to faith in 2000, spring of 2000. The kind of the revelation and deliverance from the idolatry came like the beginning of 2007, and it was, to me, I mean, it's almost as significant as the other.
Right.
Without that insight and without that deliverance, my Christian life, it would be really handicapped.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to describe unless you've gone through it. It's no different than a heroin addiction or something else, and truly being delivered from it. I mean, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. You can't really understand, I think, unless you've been through it. But I think we all have idols, and that was really what motivated me to want to write the book, is that we don't talk about it as much as we should. And the bigger ones are ones you don't see because you don't want to see them, because you really don't want to let go of them. It's really what God revealed to me. He really made it very clear that I should have understood this. I should have seen it. I didn't want to see it.
Well, the enemy wants you to think idolatry is the big golden calf and people dancing around, and we don't, the big wooden idol
stuff.
Oh no, it is the real deal.
Yeah, anything you worship more than God. And typically, what Tim Keller said, idols are good things made into ultimate things. So like a marriage is a good thing. A person who loves you is a good thing. Wanting that person's affirmation is a good thing. But make it into a have to have, make it into that, and then it becomes desperate. It was never meant to be that. Same with success, money, possessions, influence, you name it. It's all the same thing.
So what I hear you saying is that struggle in your marriage that ended up falling apart because it wasn't healthy, and it was idolatry, but you didn't know it at the time. But God took that hard thing and brought good out of it, which was my second question.
I would have never come to faith if not. It was like my perfect storm.
Yeah.
In that situation where so much wanting something, it not happening, but revealing to me that was really my greatest weakness, my greatest vulnerability, kind of like my kryptonite, really.
Well, and we need to know that about ourselves. If we don't understand where we have a weakness, we are like bait for Satan to just.
Well, we are, and we worship a lot of other things in smaller ways. I mean, we know it. The bigger things are harder to see. That was really why I kind of wanted to write about it, because they are harder to see, and they're more debilitating. Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your book of short stories.
Yeah.
Because was there a specific incident that happened that kind of inspired you to put together a book of short stories?
So what I didn't say is God used stories in my life, and both of those two monumental moments. When I came to faith, I was a psychologist for over 30 years, and I knew psychoanalytic, very Freudian, knew a lot about dreams and dream interpretation. And when I came to faith, just before, I actually prayed to God and asked for God to give me a dream to explain the cross to me. I learned a lot about the Bible, understood it all, just did not get the cross, why it was necessary, why Jesus' sacrifice was necessary, the blood, all of that. It was, logically I understood it, but it didn't convict me. And I was very close to coming to Christ. And I had actually never prayed to God for anything, because I come to believe in the Old Testament is literal. That was big, but he wasn't real enough to even pray to him. And one night I was so desperate, because of the situation I already talked about, that I just kind of cried out and said, I want you to give me, you say Jeremiah 29, he talks as, then you will call upon me and come and pray to me. I will listen to you. You will search for me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And I said, you say that. So, and I know dreams. I knew a lot about dreams. I had a mentor who thought that we speak to ourselves in dreams in a healthy way. And I realized, and he was a Jewish guy too, not a believer. I come to believe in God, at least the God of the Old Testament. I said, that's God. God either speaks to us in our dreams, or he made our minds and hearts that way, that we'll, the image bearer of will speak to us and try to help us. And so I prayed for a dream, and too long to go into now, but God actually gave me a dream that night about the cross that kind of, and really it was a conviction about sin. What I really didn't get, and I think what most lost people don't want to get, is just that depravity it's a very real thing. Sin's just not a problem. We're depraved.
Right.
We're helpless without the cross and without the grace of God. And so that was kind of what I didn't get. So the dream was a story in itself. The dream was connected to a movie I had just seen a couple of weeks earlier. And so that's another story. So those were stories. And then God gave me this other dream over and over again for a number of years that was how he finally interpreted how the revelation about the idolatry. That's how that happened. So that was through story again. And then God used other stories in my life. Like a lot of us have, some of the stories from the Chronicles of Narnia God has used in our lives. He did that. And so stories have always been very dear to me. And then they became even more dear to me because of how God used stories. And I just kind of think symbolically, being Freudian too, that, you have people in the consulting room, you're always they're saying one thing, but you're always trying to symbolically, kind of thematically understand what they're really saying, what's really going on below the surface. So I've loved stories. I just wanted to start creating some of my own, but they have the same themes. So, I've heard of the Gospel Coalition as a group of people. Actually, Tim Keller was one of those. And they talk a lot about the gospel being like 4 chapters. It's creation, it's fall, it's redemption. That God's always worked his redemptive purposes, but it really happened when Christ came for real. And then restoration and kind of the end of times or whatever. And so the stories all kind of flow that way, that it's critical to know, who we are as image bearers. That's really the core of who we are.
Yeah.
Our identity is God's love for us, and we don't need anything else. And in the fall, ever since the fall, we kind of believe we need other things.
Right.
And we worship these other things instead of God. And so the struggle there and the struggle with self and self-love and all that crazy stuff. But then how God redemptively he's always wanting to help us. I think when he finally helped us, I've come to believe we just kind of finally open our hands and let it happen.
Yep.
It's not like he's not there.
He's pursuing us all along. We just don't see him half the time.
And so the stories have different elements. Those elements, there's some that are trying to get a conception of what the garden was like before the fall, what that might have actually been like. But it's important because it kind of gives us a sense of the core of us, who we really are. And then the fall, but then especially how God redemptively works in our lives, how that happens. I really believe fiction can teach as much as nonfiction, maybe more. It's like when we talk, we go to church all the time, we hear sermons and the pastor more directly speaks to us, or we read nonfiction Christian books, or we read the Bible and it speaks to us directly.
Right.
Somebody speaks to us directly about something, it's easy to get defensive and be guarded. When we read a story and it's about somebody else,
and we see ourselves in it.
Yeah, well, you may not even be conscious that you see yourself in it.
Right.
Somehow it kind of gets in through a side door, or it just provokes us in a way. We're more open to it in some strange way. So that's kind of how the stories came about.
I love that. And I love that you're taking those 4, creation, the fall, redemption and restoration,
That's
which
right.
are the 2 kind of aspects I love to hear when I do these podcast interviews, because God redeems and he restores. And I just love, he's so creative in how he does that.
Well, he is. There's several stories too. Actually, one of the headings for one of them is, I think it was, people give Albert Einstein the credit for saying that coincidences are God's way of being anonymous. One of the stories, more than one, is kind of about that, but one is very strongly about that, about supposed coincidences,
right?
How God works. Yeah.
So if we have some people listening or even watching on the video today and they wanted to reach out to you on social media or your website, what's the best place to do
Website's that? Probably the best place. It's Samuel, Samuel, Blumenthal.com. Contact me by email. Perfect. On the website as well.
Yes, and that information is down in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for being with us today on Project Redemption. It's been a delight to get to know you a little bit here at CPE this weekend. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.